The fluorescent lights in the county detention center hummed continuously, sounding like a swarm of immortal flies clinging to the ceiling. I stared at the man sitting across from me, desperately trying to find even a drop of familiar warmth in his face. David. He was wearing his favorite dark gray suit. The cufflinks on his sleeves were custom pieces from a boutique in New York's Diamond District. They were my gift for his last birthday. They cost every penny I had secretly saved up over 3 months. He sat down and slid a stack of papers toward me through the slot under the cold reinforced glass. Sign it. It wasn't a question. I looked down at the document. Plea agreement and confession. Those words slashed at my eyes like a knife. Dave, I didn't hit that pedestrian. My voice was so hoarse it sounded like someone else's. The traffic cam should show it. Nikki was behind the wheel that day. The cameras were conveniently broken. He interrupted in an even tone, as if discussing the weather. The forensic reports are back. Only your fingerprints are on the steering wheel. I froze. My fingerprints? I didn't even touch the steering wheel of that car that day, unless you transferred them. I raised my eyes to meet his, my voice trembling. You transferred my prints. You took those forensic science electives in law school. You know how it's done, Catherine. For the first time, Dave used my full name. The sheer alienation in his voice carried a chill colder than the iron bars of this holding facility. Don't make a scene. Nikki has a weak immune system. If she goes to a state penitentiary, she won't last 6 months. But you're different. You have a strong constitution. You'll do a couple of years in a minimum security facility upstate, and you'll be out. Do a couple of years and you'll be out. He said it so lightly, as if going to prison was like taking a vacation to the Hamptons. He paused for a second and pulled another document from his leather briefcase. That old apartment in Queens your adoptive dad left you. I've already filed the paperwork to transfer the deed. Nikki needs a quiet place to recover her health. You have to understand. I felt like I had been drenched in ice water. That apartment was the only thing my adoptive father left me before he passed away. My name was on the deed. How could he have transferred it? You forged my signature on a power of attorney. I could hear my own voice shaking. Dave didn't deny it. He just looked at his Rolex as if he were running late for an important deposition and stood up. Sign it. It will be better for everyone. He grabbed his briefcase and threw me one last look. I will never forget that look for the rest of my life. It's how you look at garbage. As if I were a worn-out tool that had become a nuisance and needed to be thrown away. Dave, I pressed myself against the glass. The tips of my fingers turned white from the pressure. 3 years. I was your wife for 3 years. I quit my job, did your laundry, cooked your meals, when your mother was in the hospital. I stayed up for days taking care of her. Do you really not have a single drop of feeling left for me? He was already walking away. The sound of his leather Oxfords hitting the concrete floor echoed like physical blows directly against my chest. I sank back onto the metal stool. My palms were sweating. The county jail jumpsuit clung to my damp back. I forced myself to slow my breathing. 1, 2, 3, you can't break down, not right now. I closed my eyes. 3 years ago, when I married Dave, everyone thought he had hit the jackpot. Back then, he was just a junior associate at a rundown law firm. The sleeves of his suit jacket were always a little too short, and he took me on dates to cheap diners where the bill rarely topped 20 bucks. But I didn't care. All that mattered to me was the moment when, under the pouring rain, he gave me his umbrella and let himself get soaked to the bone. What an absolute fool I was. I gripped the corner of the confession paper so tightly it crumpled. I wasn't refusing to sign it because I was so incredibly strong, but because Kate, even if I rotted in a maximum security prison, would never let someone like Nikki build her happiness on my bones. The corrections officers came and escorted me back to solitary confinement. I lay down on the stiff cot and stared at the ceiling, listening to a woman crying in the next cell all night. I didn't cry. All my tears had dried up the second Dave turned his back and walked away. Early the next morning, the door to the interrogation room opened. I thought it was the assistant district attorney, but it was Brenda, my mother-in-law. Well, soon-to-be ex-mother-in-law. She was wearing that exact floral jacket I bought her on sale at Macy's. Her hair was freshly permed, and her lips were painted with bright lipstick. Walking in, she tossed her handbag onto the table. Kate, she sat down and crossed her legs, looking like a plantation mistress coming to inspect the field hands. I stayed silent. waiting for the performance to begin. Luke, just tell me. Dave is asking you to just sign a piece of paper. What could be simpler? Why are you being so stubborn? Brenda sighed, and the sheer phoniness of her tone made nausea rise in my throat. I feel so terrible for poor Nikki, so young, dealing with her health issues, and then getting into this awful accident. How could she possibly survive the torment of prison? And I, on the other hand, can survive it. I finally spoke up. Well, of course you can, she declared, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. You're a tough girl. When my sciatica flared up, you carried me down 5 flights of stairs on your back all by yourself and didn't even lose your breath. Big deal. You do a couple of years. You get out. You'll still be young. She reached her hand across the table intending to pat mine. I yanked my hand back. Her expression instantly changed. What kind of attitude is this? Brenda's voice shot up an octave. I am trying to talk to you nicely. Do you have any idea that my son picking up someone like you was enough luck to last you 8 lifetimes? Look at yourself, a foster kid, no father, no mother, no connections. In the next second, she jumped up, marched around the table, and lunged at me. I saw her palm coming, but I didn't dodge. My left cheek burned like fire. You cursed witch, bringing nothing but trouble. Brenda shoved her finger in my face. If you were a normal woman, my son wouldn't have gone looking for someone else. You can't even keep your own man satisfied and you blame others. I touched my cheek. The metallic taste of blood seeped onto my lips. Then, I raised my head and looked directly at her. Brenda, frightened by the look in my eyes, took a step back. I don't know what my face looked like at that moment, but she actually retreated. Are you done hitting me? I asked. Brenda's lips trembled and then she shrieked even louder. Oh, how dare you look at me like that? Have you completely lost your mind? Let me tell you something, Kate. You're going to sign it like a good little girl. You have nowhere else to go. My son said so. And what else did he say? He said that tonight he's taking Nikki to some fancy corporate gala to celebrate. She smirked coldly. And you just sit here and wait for your sentencing. She tossed her hair, grabbed her bag, and walked out. Before leaving, she made sure to add, when you married into our family, you didn't bring a single cent of dowry. For 3 years. You lived and ate on our dime. Consider this paying off your debt. The heavy metal door slammed shut. I was alone. The pain on my face had dulled. A strange calmness settled over my soul. Like a kettle where the water has finally reached a rolling boil and stopped churning. Fini. A corporate gala tonight to celebrate. Dave and Nikki were going out to celebrate arm in arm while sending me to prison. All right. Have your fun. On my way back to the cell, a young corrections officer discreetly slipped a bottle of mineral water into my hand and whispered, "Someone on the outside is looking for a way out for you." I froze. On the outside? Who? I didn't have any family. My adoptive father died of cancer 3 years ago. Did I really have no one in this world? I suddenly remembered that antique silver locket I had worn since childhood, the one Dave pawned to pay his law school loans. I remembered my adoptive father's dying words, "Katie, your real family, one day they will come for you." I always thought it was the delirium of a dying Mayfair man, but now, remembering it, my heart suddenly beat faster. At 9:00 p.m., a sudden commotion erupted in the corridor. Footsteps, the crackle of police radios, the loud clanking of heavy iron doors opening. I sat up on my cot. A middle-aged man approached the bars of my cell. He wore an immaculate bespoke suit. He had silver at his temples, but his back was as straight as a rifle barrel. Behind him stood 3 young men, each taller and more imposing than the last. The second, the older man at the front, saw me. His eyes turned red and his lips trembled. "Katie." That voice made the hair on my arms stand up. It wasn't fear. It was an inexplicable, deep-rooted tremor rising straight from my blood. The cell door slid open. The man stepped in quickly, reaching out a hand to touch my face. I instinctively recoiled. His hand froze in midair. "It's me." His voice was low and gravelly. Tears pooled in his eyes. "Katie, it's your dad." My head was ringing. The tallest of the men standing behind him spoke. His voice was deep, like a cello. "Little sister, I'm your oldest brother. We've been looking for you for the 18 years. The second man pulled a locket from his pocket. The exact same pattern, the exact same shape as mine, just slightly larger. "The DNA results came back 3 days ago," he said. "A 97% match." The third man stayed silent. He just stared intently at the red handprint Brenda had left on my face. An incredibly dangerous emotion swirled in his eyes. Who hit her? He asked. His voice wasn't loud, but it felt like the temperature in the cell dropped by 10 degrees. I opened my mouth, but couldn't make a sound. This wasn't real. It felt like an absurd dream. 3 hours ago, I was figuring out how to die with dignity, and now they're telling me I'm the biological daughter of a powerful American industrialist. Don't be afraid. The middle-aged man, my father, John Sterling, crouched down so we were at eye level. His voice was unbelievably gentle for a man who controlled a multi-billion-dollar corporate empire. Everything is handled. Those fake charges, that so-called fingerprint evidence. Your oldest brother tore it all to shreds overnight. You are a free woman, Katie, a free woman. Those words hit me right in the heart. Suddenly, my eyes burned, not because of Dave, not because of this dead marriage, but for myself, for the version of me who spent 3 years as an unpaid servant only to end up as the scapegoat meant to rot in a cell. I took a deep breath and swallowed my tears. That confession is null and void, the oldest brother said sharply. Already have all the evidence of evidence tampering and the wire transfers of the bribes Dave paid the jail staff. Now it's his turn to sit in here. The youngest brother was still staring at the slap mark. He pulled out his iPhone, snapped a photo of my face, and said with a stone-cold expression, "Fixation of evidence." I stood up, feeling my legs give way. John Sterling took off his tailored overcoat and draped it over my shoulders. The coat smelled faintly of cedar, a very expensive but understated cologne. "Let's go," he said. "Dad is taking you home." Exiting through the back doors of the detention center, I saw 3 black Cadillac Escalades with government-style VIP plates. 2 security contractors in black suits stood like statues beside each vehicle. The youngest brother, Steve, walked beside me. He turned his head and looked at me. "Sis, yeah, what do you want to do with that old hag who hit you?" I paused for a few seconds. "Leave her be for now." Steve raised an eyebrow. Climbed into the SUV, sinking into the soft leather seat, and closed my eyes. The smug face of Brenda flashed through my mind, along with Dave's cold back as he walked away, and the text message Nikki had sent me earlier. "Katie, I'm sorry, Dave says he loves me more." At the end of the text was a mocking smiley face emoji. I opened my eyes. My oldest brother, Mike, looked at me in the rearview mirror. "Where is this corporate gala being held tonight?" Mike checked his tablet. "The Plaza Hotel. It's the most high-profile Chamber of Commerce event in the city tonight." Dave used his status as a junior partner at his firm to score 2 invites. "Oh, by the way, one of the main sponsors of this gala is the Sterling Corporation." As he said this, his lips curled into a mocking smile. I licked my chapped lips. "I want to go there." Silence hung in the car for a few seconds. John Sterling turned around from the front passenger seat. "Katie, Dad." Just saying the word felt incredibly foreign on my tongue, but I saw his shoulders visibly jump at the sound. "I want to go." When he sent me to that cell, he said he was taking that woman out to celebrate tonight. "I want to throw a celebration for him, though." 3 seconds of silence, and then Steve laughed. It wasn't a joyful laugh, it was the thrill of a predator catching the scent of prey. "Deal." Steve leaned back and drummed his fingers on the armrest. "But first, we need to get our little sister cleaned up. If you walk in looking like that, the slap in the face won't ring as loud." He was referring to my wrinkled county jail jumpsuit. Even though I had taken the top off, the white t-shirt underneath still smelled of institutional disinfectant. 20 minutes later, the motorcade pulled up to a sprawling, luxurious estate in Westchester County. John told me this was the Sterling family's secondary residence when they were doing business in New York. The estate had a winter conservatory, a heated indoor pool, and a walk-in closet the size of a floor at Saks Fifth Avenue. When they led me to the master bathroom, I was still in a daze. The steaming water washed away the grime of 3 days without a proper shower. The stench of the jail was replaced by the scent of luxury botanical soap. I looked down at my wrists. There were raw red marks from the handcuffs and a dark bruise on my shin from God knows where. The mirror reflected a face with a sallow, grayish complexion, chapped lips, and dark bags under the eyes. This was me. The one Dave said had a strong constitution who could do a couple of years and be fine. I towel-dried my hair and stood out. In the dressing room, 3 dresses were already hanging up for me to choose from. I picked a black one, sharp shoulder lines, a hem right at the knee, and a row of elegant hidden buttons down the back. It wasn't a flashy red dress for a battle, tonight. I wasn't going to war, I was going to a funeral. The funeral of my dead marriage and Dave's entire professional reputation. The styling team worked with lightning speed, flawlessly concealing the slap mark and the dark circles. After the final touch of lipstick, the lead stylist stepped back and nodded in satisfaction. I looked at myself in the full-length mirror and barely recognized the reflection. So, this is what I actually looked like. Not an exhausted housewife slaving over a stove, not a punching bag for a screaming mother-in-law. Time to go, Steve's voice echoed from outside the door. I took a deep breath and stepped over the threshold. Outside stood John, Mike, Andy, the middle brother, and Steve, a father and 3 brothers lined up, all 4 in dark tailored suits. Their combined presence was so overwhelming, it felt like it sucked the air out of the hallway. Seeing me, John held out his arm. Dad will walk with you. I looped my arm through his. My palms were slightly sweaty, but it wasn't fear. It was the feeling of my heart pounding wildly in anticipation of the coming triumph. David Davis, Esquire, I hope you enjoy your party tonight. The Plaza Hotel, the Grand Ballroom. Crystal chandeliers flooded the room with light as bright as day. At that moment, Dave was standing by the champagne tower. He held a flute of champagne in his left hand, his right arm wrapped around Nikki's waist. I knew this because my middle brother, Andy, had already ordered his people to take over the ballroom security camera feeds. Naturally, there was no need to hack it. The building's management answered to the Sterling Corporation, and access was granted instantly. So, when the elevator doors opened and I glanced into the hall, they were the first people I saw. Dave was in a brand new suit, looking much more vibrant than when we met in the interrogation room. He was smiling, clinking glasses with a middle-aged executive, occasionally leaning in to whisper something in Nikki's ear. Nikki would cover her mouth and giggle, leaning against him like a delicate little bird. In that exact spot, at a nearly identical event, I was the one standing on his arm 3 months ago. He stood in the doorway, most chelis. Behind me were my father and my 3 brothers. Steve's voice murmured right by my ear, "Want to walk right in or wait for him to spot you?" "We wait," I replied. I was waiting for the perfect moment. Dave raised his glass, offering a toast to Nikki. Even from across the massive room, I could see the curve of his lips. It was the smug smile of a man who thought he had the whole world in his pocket. He probably thought he had one. He got rid of me, stole my apartment, and tonight, he was introducing the love of his life to high society, a picture-perfect life. "All right, that's enough, let's go," I said. The ushers pulled open the massive double doors, holding on to John Sterling's arm. I stepped into the ballroom step by step. The click of my heels against the marble floor rang out as sharply as a tolling bell. The first person to notice us was the maitre d'. At the entrance, seeing John Sterling's face, he snapped to attention like a coiled spring and bowed deeply. "Mr. Sterling," his shout wasn't deafening, but it was loud enough for everyone within a 20-foot radius to turn their heads, and then the chain reaction began. Those who recognized the billionaire industrialist started whispering. Those who didn't were stunned by the sheer gravity of the entourage. A Wall Street titan and 3 young men, each possessing the looks and aura of crown princes. And in the center, a young woman in a stunning black dress. The whispers spread like ripples across a pond. Toward the back of the room, I ignored the reactions of the crowd. My gaze cut straight through the masses and locked directly onto Dave. He was still smiling, completely unaware. Nikki turned around first. Likely drawn by the sudden hush in the room, she glanced toward the entrance. First curiosity, then confusion, and then her smile froze, as if she had been paralyzed. Nikki yanked on Dave's sleeve. I could see her lips moving. She probably said, "Look over there." Dave turned his head across half the ballroom. I watched his face undergo a terrifying metamorphosis. First, casual indifference, then, absolute shock, then, his pupils dilated. He recognized me. In that split second, the blood drained from his face with terrifying speed, from his cheeks to his lips. He turned a deathly ashen gray. The champagne flute tilted. The sparkling wine spilled all over the lapel of his brand new jacket. But he didn't even notice. I smiled at him, a light, barely perceptible smile, used slightly lifting the corners of my mouth, the exact same way I had smiled at him on our wedding night. His Adam's apple bobbed. "Kate, All of this listened to my explanation. He didn't fall to the floor. There were too many VIPs around, and whatever pitiful shreds of pride he had left kept him standing. But his hands were shaking uncontrollably, and he looked glued to the marble. Nikki recovered her senses faster. She took a step back, hiding behind Dave's back, gripping the fabric of his suit jacket with both hands so hard her knuckles turned white. "It's impossible," her shrill, trembling voice carried through the crowd to my ears. "She's supposed to be locked up. You said everything was taken care of." "Shut up," Dave hissed through clenched teeth. I didn't rush my approach. John led me toward the center of the hall. The crowd hastily parted. Several high-ranking politicians and investment bankers stepped forward to offer greetings. Their deference was so profound. It was as if they were standing before royalty. "Mr. Sterling, we haven't seen you at these events in ages. Is this your daughter?" John smiled warmly, but offered no explanations. He simply patted my hand resting on his arm. The gesture was so incredibly natural. You'd think we hadn't been separated for the 18 years. I walked with him toward the VIP lounge area. As I passed by Dave, I didn't even slow my pace. I merely let him catch the edge of my peripheral vision. Just one glance. He stood there, rigid as a board, his lips trembling like a fish thrown onto the dock. Walked past him. Click, click, click. Every step of my heels struck directly at his heart. I knew it, because his gaze followed me obsessively as I approached, and as I walked away, his stare practically burned. From behind me came Nikki's muffled shriek. "Dave, how did she get out?" "You said the evidence." I said. "Shut your mouth." Dave's voice was low, but due to his monstrous stress, it shredded the air. The corners of my lips rose a little higher. "Don't be in such a rush. Tonight is going to be a very long night." The VIP lounge was a semicircular red velvet booth offering a commanding view of the entire ballroom. They seated me to the right of John. My three brothers flanked us. A waiter bowed deeply and presented our drinks. That subservient posture was just another reminder. This hotel belongs to my family. Dave came here to celebrate sending me to prison, but the very deed to the land under this building bore John Sterling's signature. "Ipser, he, sis, my middle brother Andy," murmured from my left. At 10:30, they're doing the contract signing ceremony. Dave's law firm is one of the invited contractors. He's been kissing ass for this project for 6 months. "Cancel his firm's participation," I said. Andy glanced at me without asking questions, pulled out his phone, and sent a text. 30 seconds later, on the massive digital display at the front of the room, the list of partnered firms silently updated. Dave and Associates vanished from the screen. I picked up a crystal tumbler, took a sip, and looked over the rim. I watched as the senior partner of Dave's firm practically dragged Dave to the side. The partner's face was purple with rage. He was furiously dressing Dave down in a harsh whisper. Dave's face went from pale white to a sickly lead color. Finally, he was starting to panic. For real, this wasn't the fleeting shock of my arrival. This was the crushing realization that his career, his future, everything could implode tonight. Nikki was still clinging to him, but all traces of the cute little bird were gone. She yanked his sleeve and cried quietly, "Dave, what do we do? How does she know them? Who is she?" Dave violently ripped his arm away. The motion was so rough that Nikki stumbled and nearly rolled her ankle in her heels. I watched the scene. 3 months ago, Nikki bragged to me via text, "Dave treats me 100 times better than he treats you," and here it was. That 100 times better treatment turned out to be nothing but smoke. Meanwhile, my oldest brother, Mike, was standing near the back of the room with a glass of red wine, casually chatting with the heavyweights of Manhattan's elite. He spoke softly, but after every sentence he dropped, the crowd's attitude toward Dave visibly shifted. The changes were subtle, from polite nods from colleagues to deliberate ignoring and physical distancing. No one wants to stand next to a man whose ship is about to sink. Those are the unspoken rules of high society. Gossip moves faster than the wind here. I sat on the velvet sofa, watching it all unfold like a slow-motion film. "Do you want me to tell security to throw him out right now?" Steve asked, lazily chewing on an unlit cigarette. "No." "Then what?" "Let him humiliate himself. Let him dangle on the hook all night," I replied. "Let him feel exactly what it's like when everyone turns their back on you." Steve raised an eyebrow, twirled the cigarette in his fingers, and slipped it into his breast pocket. "All right. Whatever little sister says." Time ticked by. At Exactly 10:00 p.m., Dave finally broke. He smoothed out his wine-stained jacket, took a deep breath, and marched toward our VIP booth. Nikki tried to follow him, but he stopped her with one heavy glare. He walked through the crowd alone, keeping his back unnaturally straight. It was a lawyer's professional instinct. Even if you're boiling with panic inside, you have to maintain your poker face on the outside. But I noticed him shoving his hands into his trouser pockets, his telltale habit. When his nerves were shot, after 3 years of marriage, I knew it far too well. He stopped about 10 paces from our booth because Steve stepped into his path. "Good evening." Dave forced a standard corporate smile. "Yeah, I know who you are," Steve replied lazily, but with a tone of absolute glacial ice. "You're the guy who threw my sister in a county jail." Dave's smile froze. He looked over Steve's shoulder at me. I stared right back. "Kate," his voice cracked. "Can we talk?" I remained silent. Steve turned his head toward me, his entire posture asking, "Your call? Do I let him through or not?" "Let him in," I said. Steve shifted, but only enough to let one person squeeze past. Dave sidled through the gap and approached me. From this distance, I could see the cold sweat on his temples. "Sit." I pointed to the armchair across from me. He sat. Silence stretched for several seconds. I looked at him. He looked at me as if we were back in that visitation room behind bars. Only the glass partition was gone. Now, a chasm of an entire social class lay between us. "How did you get out?" Dave finally spoke. He tried to sound composed, but his vibrating vocal cords gave him away. "How do you think?" I answered a question with a question. He swallowed hard. "Kate, all of this, listen to my explanation." "Explanation for what?" I cut in smoothly, as if discussing what we were having for dinner. "How you forged my fingerprints. How you bribed the corrections officers. Or are you going to map out the scheme of how you used a fake power of attorney to transfer my dad's apartment to your mistress?" With every word I spoke, Dave's face grew wider. I placed my glass on the table and leaned forward slightly. "Counselor, you didn't come over here to explain anything. You came because you want to know who is standing behind me, right?" He stayed quiet, but his pupils contracted. I hit the nail on the head. Lawyers are always like this. Even on the edge of a cliff, their first thought isn't to beg for mercy, but to assess the situation, gather intel, and find a loophole. He wanted to see my hand. "You don't need to know that." I leaned back into the velvet cushions. "You only need to know one thing. I didn't sign that plea deal, and I never will. And all the evidence of your tampering, perjury, and bribing public officials is already sitting on the desks of the district attorney's office." Dave's face finally lost whatever color remained. "You," his voice scraped like sandpaper. "You don't have proof." He laughed, a genuine laugh. This man was still in denial. 3 years, and he hadn't changed a bit. "Are you sure?" I asked. I pulled my iPhone from my clutch and hit play on an audio file. It was our conversation in the jail yesterday. His own voice. The cameras were conveniently broken. The forensic reports are back, spilled from the phone's speakers. In the quiet of the VIP booth, it was crystal clear. Interrogation rooms are bugged. But he had paid to have the mics turned off. What he didn't know was that a micro recorder had been sewn into the seam of my clothes. I had hidden it on my very first day, not because I foresaw him stooping this low, but because after 3 years of living with a lawyer, I learned the golden rule: always collect evidence. Dave's face contorted. First shock, then anger, and then fear. Pure, naked, animal terror. "Catherine?" He jumped up abruptly. His chair scraped a foot backwards. You recorded that." "Sit." "It wasn't me who said it. It was Steve." My brother had silently moved behind Dave. One heavy hand clamped down on my ex-husband's shoulder. The grip was so punishing that Dave's knees buckled and he collapsed back into the chair. In the presence of my sister. "Watch your tone," Steve whispered, as if coaxing a toddler. But the fingers digging into Dave's shoulder squeezed so hard that Dave winced in agony, not daring to make a peep. I put my phone away. "That's all for tonight." I stood up and looked him dead in the eye. "Go home and think very carefully about where we'll meet next. At a mediator's office or in a criminal courtroom." I turned and took 2 steps, then stopped. "Oh, right." I looked back. "Your firm's contract tonight was cancelled. The reason? The Sterling Corporation Board decided your firm carries severe reputational and legal liabilities." His pupils spasmed. "Just business. Nothing personal." I walked away. As we exited the ballroom, The eyes of New York's high society followed me. The looks were drastically different from the indifferent nods I received for 3 years while trailing behind Dave as the lawyer's wife. Back then, they looked at me and thought, Dave's wife, a housewife, a nobody. Now, they looked at me and thought, the heiress to the Sterling Empire. I took John's arm and stepped into the private elevator. When the doors closed, I leaned against the metal wall and let out a long breath. Tired? My father asked with concern. A little, I admitted. Playing it ice cold all night is exhausting. Now that only family was in the elevator, I let myself relax. There were deep alfmon indents on my palms from my fingernails. When Dave approached the booth, my heart was hammering so hard it felt like it would burst from my chest. I wasn't afraid of him, I was just disgusted, physically repulsed by looking at the man I had shared a bed with. A man who had tried to bury me alive. It was more nauseating than staring at a snake. You did great. Held your own, Mike said. But you won't have to dirty your hands from here on out. The lawsuits, the complaints to the state bar, the financial audits. I'll take care of it all. No, I closed my eyes. I'll do it myself. Silence fell over the car. At least let us back you up, Andy said gently. I opened my eyes and looked at these 3 brothers I had known for less than 24 hours. To be honest, the word trust was still a luxury for me, but a 97% biological match was far more reliable than 3 years of Dave's sweet talking. All right, I said, but I'm holding the knife. In the dark cabin of the Escalade, Steve chuckled. Whatever you say, that worm has soft bones anyway. You won't need a very sharp blade for him. We returned to the estate late that night. I took a shower, put on a silk nightgown, and climbed into a bed that was about 4 times the size of the one I had slept in for the past 3 years. I stared at the ceiling, running the plan through my head. Right now, Dave was definitely scrambling to dig up info on the Sterling family. With his connections and skills, he'd uncover my father's dossier by tomorrow morning at the latest, and then he'd realize exactly what kind of swamp he had stepped into. He had 2 options, either act like a cornered rat and launch an attack, or crawl back on his knees. Knowing him, he'd try both. First, he'd try to bite, and when his teeth broke, he'd beg. So, I needed to cut off all his escape routes before he started thrashing. I grabbed my phone and texted Mike, check one detail for me tomorrow, the exact date Dave and Nikki met. He had told me they met after our wedding, but I didn't buy it. Mika replied instantly. Already checking. Preliminary records of their social media DMs suggest they started talking at least 6 months before your wedding at City Hall. 6 months. The fingers gripping my phone turned cold. So, he planned it all from the very beginning. It didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that this timeline would prove the marriage was contracted under fraudulent pretenses, giving me a massive upper hand in a New York divorce court when dividing assets. Not that I needed his pathetic pennies, but I would not let Nikki get a single dime. I put my phone on the pillow and rolled onto my side. My last thought before falling asleep, tomorrow is a work day. Dave will get to his firm at 8:30 a.m., and his firm's biggest client is a subsidiary of Sterling Corp. Tomorrow is going to be a fun day. At 7:00 a.m., the smell from the kitchen woke me up. Coming downstairs, I saw Steve smoking on the veranda and scrolling through the news on his phone. Without looking up, he said, the housekeeper made buttermilk pancakes and oatmeal. Which one do you want? Both. I'm starving. He snorted and put out his cigarette. Oh, by the way, your soon-to-be ex-husband, the loser, showed up at his office at 6:40 this morning. Guess he stayed up all night running background checks. I sat at the heavy oak table and pulled a plate of fresh pancakes toward me. And, did he find anything? Enough. He figured out what John Sterling does. He's probably puking in the office bathroom from fear right now. I ate slowly. It was delicious. 100 times better than the breakfasts I spent 3 years making for Dave, waking up 40 minutos before him just to cook. Because this was made for me. His senior partner has a meeting this morning to renew their retainer with our corporate reps, I said calmly. Tell Andy to send his people. Let the meeting proceed as planned, but demand a hard requirement. Dave must be replaced as the point of contact. The reason? Concerns over the professional ethics of attorney David Davis. No need to explain further. The partner will fill in the blanks himself. Steve leaned against the doorframe, looking at me with interest. Slick move. You don't fire him directly, but you let his whole firm know he's radioactive. you're forcing him to quit. It's not revenge. I wiped my mouth with a napkin. It's a rational management decision. Steve gave me a thumbs up. At 10:00 a.m., I sat in the estate study and listened to the negotiations via an audio feed. The Sterling reps were impeccably polite, using dry, professional corporate jargon to request a change of counsel. No cursing, no mention of personal lives, just liability, corporate security, and long-term trust. But everyone in the conference room understood the subtext. Dave's partner immediately announced, "We will conduct an internal ethics review immediately." 20 minutes later, Andy sent me a screenshot of a firm-wide email. Management announced that effective immediately, Dave was suspended from all casework pending an audit. It meant Dave had become a ghost at his own firm. No cases, no bonuses, not even allowed in the conference rooms. It was worse than being fired. Everyone looks at you like a leper, just waiting for you to crack and pack your desk yourself. It was probably a lot like how I felt in solitary confinement. At noon, my phone rang, unknown number, but I recognized the Manhattan area code. It was his office line. I had blocked his cell. I answered. "Kate," his voice was raspy, like he had a mouthful of sand. "We need to talk." "About what?" "The divorce, about everything. I know I was wrong, I'm begging you." 12:30 at the Starbucks downstairs from your office, I said and hung up. I hadn't gone soft. I just needed to confirm something in person, and I needed to bait him into saying a few more things that would become evidence for the New York State Supreme Court. At 12:25 he walked into the cafe, sat by the window and ordered a black coffee. Steve had tagged along and sat at the next table wearing clear non-prescription glasses as a disguise. Although standing at 6 feet 3 inches with military-grade posture, he still drew eyes from everyone in the room. Dave was 3 minutes late. When he walked in, I barely recognized him. He had aged 10 years overnight, dark circles under his eyes, his suit jacket buttoned wrong, his hair a mess like he'd been pulling it out. He sat across from me and was silent for a long time. "What's your relationship to John Sterling?" he finally asked, straight to business, spoken like a true litigator. "He's my biological father." I took a sip of my coffee. Dave's hands clenched into fists under the table. "You lied to me for 3 years. I set my cup down on the saucer with a clack and stared at him intently. "Dave, you call that a lie?" "I hid the fact that I grew up in foster care." "What did you hide?" "You were sleeping with Nikki before we even got married. You never intended to be faithful. You married me because you thought an orphan with no connections would make a convenient unpaid maid. And once you climb high enough, you could kick me to the curb." His lips twitched, but he didn't argue. "So, don't play the victim." I leaned back. "Tok, why did you call me? What do you want?" He stayed quiet. When he finally looked up, there was a look in his eyes I hadn't seen before, a mix of animal terror and cold calculation, a drowning man grabbing at any piece of driftwood. "I want to offer a deal," he said. "You bury the tampering and bribery charges. If the DA gets those files, I go to prison. You know I can't survive in a penitentiary, but you thought I could." I scoffed. "When you tried to send me there, did you think about that for even a second?" He choked on his words. "Name your terms," I said. I'll walk away. I'll leave you everything. The apartment, the car, the savings, it's all yours. I'll deal with Nikki. I'll dump her." He spoke rapidly, like a rehearsed opening statement. "And we can start over." Those last words made me doubt my own hearing. "What did you just say?" "Start over." He leaned forward. A manic desperation flashed in his eyes. "Kate, I know I messed up, but now, with your new status, if we got back together." I slammed my cup down on the table so hard that hot coffee splashed all over his hand. He yanked it back with a hiss. "David Davis." My voice was so flat it even gave me the chills. "You sit here and offered to start over not because you love me, but because you ran a background check on my father's net worth." He opened his mouth, trying to justify himself. "What do you take me for?" "An unlimited Amex card, 3 days ago. You were ready to let me rot in a cell. Now you find out who has my back, and you decide to play the repentant husband." I stood up and grabbed my purse. "My lawyers will serve you with divorce papers personally. Leaving you without a dime is just the baseline. As for the felonies, I haven't filed an official police report yet, but the files are with my attorney. How long they stay in his desk depends on your behavior." I walked toward the exit. "If you sign the papers quietly and don't make Any sudden moves, maybe those folders stay in the drawer. But if you try to pull one more stunt. I turned back and gave him one last look. Next time, you'll be the one sitting in solitary. I stepped out into the freezing New York air. Steve got up from his table, took off his stupid glasses, and scoffed. Start over? This scumbag has more nerve than brains. I didn't answer because I knew Dave. His words weren't a genuine plea for mercy. He was testing the waters. He was probing my boundaries. Calculating how much room he had to maneuver within the law. A truly desperate man would have been crying on his knees. But he was still doing the math. Which meant this wasn't over. He was going to try something. All his routes were blocked. So now he was going to thrash in panic. I got into the heated SUV and told Steve, put a tail on Nikki. Dave is backed into a corner. He might try to flip on her to the DA to save his own skin, or they might go all in together. Already done, Steve started the massive engine. Our guys have been on her since last night. Nikki withdrew 20 grand in cash this morning and went for a consultation. With who? Arthur Vance, high-profile Manhattan divorce and asset division attorney. I fell silent for a few seconds. Nikki was preparing to sue Dave for the assets. Hilarious. A scenario where the spiders eat each other in a jar was unfolding faster than I thought. Dave had transferred my dad's apartment into her name. Now Nikki was using that property as leverage and lawyering. If she struck at him first, the show would be spectacular. Let them have fun, I said. We don't interfere. What if she tries to pin it back on you? I watched the snow-covered streets of Manhattan blur past the window. She's facing felony vehicular manslaughter. Her only shield is the fake evidence Dave cooked up. If she goes after him, who's going to protect her from the DA? Steve chuckled. So, Dave is a hostage to Nikki. They're tied by blood. Whoever betrays the other first goes to Rikers. First. Exactly. But, the harder we squeeze, the more likely they are to stick together. So, we need to blow them apart for good. I pulled out my phone. I hadn't deleted Nikki's contact info. I knew it would come in handy. I don't need to do anything myself. I just need to let Dave know that Nikki is looking for the exit. And how are you going to do that? Steve asked, anonymously. He's a seasoned lawyer. He's the best at pulling the truth out of fragmented info. We give him a little nudge, and he'll dig it all up himself faster than I ever could. Steve shook his head. Man, your brain is scary. At 3:00 p.m., I asked Andy to send Dave a short text from an untraceable burner number. Just 4 words, Nikki. Attorney Arthur Vance. It was enough, given Dave's paranoia. He'd use his channels to find out who Vance was and why Nikki was seeing him. He discovered that the true love of his life, the woman he framed his lawful wife for, was sharpening a knife for his back. Once trust shatters, no amount of vows can glue it back together. I sat in the estate's library brewing herbal tea, just as expected. At 7:23 p.m., Andy sent me an audio file. He had planted a bug in Dave's car beforehand, so I could listen to their meltdown. Dave was screaming at Nikki at the top of his lungs, demanding to know why she hired a lawyer behind his back. Nikki was bawling, screaming that she was terrified he would sell her out to the DA to save his own skin. The fight escalated. Finally, Nikki slammed the car door and ran off. Dave was left alone in the cabin, violently punching the steering wheel 3 times. I turned off the recording and sipped my hot tea. The first crack had appeared. From here, it would widen on its own. Now it was time for my next move, making it official. The powerhouse legal team Mike hired would file a divorce petition, not an uncontested split, a full-blown lawsuit in the state Supreme Court. I wanted a New York judge to put his guilt in black and white, stamped with the seal of the state. Who was the victim and who was the criminal? This wasn't about splitting the silverware. This was for every morning I woke up at 4:00 a.m. to make his oatmeal, for every time Brenda humiliated me and I swallowed my tears, for every night I waited up for him and fell asleep on the couch. Those days wouldn't just vanish without a trace. They were going to become lines in a judicial decree, and then I would turn the page forever. The next morning, as a process server delivered the lawsuit to Dave, I was eating breakfast in the glass conservatory. Steve sat across from me, scrolling through local news on his phone, and suddenly laughed. Your ex-mother-in-law is putting on a show. What happened? She showed up at your old apartment building in Queens at 7:00 a.m., screaming at the top of her lungs in the courtyard, saying you're shameless. That you spread your legs for some rich old sugar daddy, calling you a cheap whore. I took a bite of my toast, and, gaps, neighbors called 911, the NYPD. So with up. Threatened her with a citation for disorderly conduct, and chased her off, but she recorded an angry voice memo and posted it to the building's next door group. Somebody leaked it to a massive NYC gossip page on Facebook. There are over 200 comments already. Most say the crazy old bat lost her mind, but there are a few geniuses acting edgy, married 3 years and already jumping into a billionaire's bed. Who knows the real story? I put down my napkin and kept drinking my tea. Want us to have the admins take it down? Steve asked. No. Why? The more she rants, the more sympathy I'll get later, at the trial. All of this goes straight into the evidence file as direct proof of psychological abuse and systematic harassment by the respondent's family. Let her scream. The louder she is, the higher the compensatory damages. Steve looked at me with a newfound undisguised respect. 3 years living with a lawyer really paid off. I didn't smile. The price of those 3 years was entirely too high. At 10:00 a.m., Mike's legal team confirmed Dave was served. The petition included an index of evidence spanning 37 pages, Nikki's text messages, independent fingerprint analysis, bank statements of wire transfers to the jail staff, and medical records of the abrasions from the handcuffs, 37 pages. I gave him 3 years of my youth. He gave me back 37 pages of prime felony evidence. A fair trade. At noon, Dave called again from an unknown number. I answered, listening. So, you decided to sue. His voice was cold and hard, nothing like the puddle of a man begging in the coffee shop. You think just because you have rich backers, you're God in a courtroom. I pinned the phone between my ear and shoulder, opening the files Mike had just emailed me on my laptop. What's your point? Half your evidence was obtained illegally. The recording in the jail is an unauthorized wiretap. That's a direct violation of two-party consent laws in New York. A judge will throw it out as inadmissible. Counselor. Interrupted. My tone pure ice. Are you trying to give me a lecture on the penal code? My lawyer charges 50 times your hourly rate. You don't need to worry about the procedural admissibility of my evidence. Did you call me just to teach a law seminar? I called to tell you. He took a deep breath. His voice carried the desperate resolve of a man with nothing left to lose. You want a war? You'll get a war. I have aces up my sleeve. Oh. And what are those? Your connection to those so-called backers on the Forbes list. How are you going to prove to the public that you're actual blood relatives, and not just his high-end escort? You can buy a fake DNA test at any private clinic. I just have to drop a few hints to the tabloids, and public opinion will trample your holy father into the dirt. Are you threatening me with blackmail? I'm giving you a warning, he barked. It's easier to destroy a reputation than it is to build a factory. Think carefully. Your so-called dad is a major CEO, and what does Wall Street hate more than anything? Dirty tabloid scandals. I stayed silent for 3 seconds. I pulled the phone away from my ear, hit the record button, and put it back. Keep going. My offer. We split amicably. You withdraw the lawsuits and destroy the evidence. I'll sign an uncontested divorce agreement and leave you all the assets. But you sign a waiver of all claims and a strict non-disclosure agreement, an NDA. I got it. He wasn't just saving his own skin. He was saving Nikki, or rather, saving himself from Nikki dragging him down with her during a DA interrogation. I'll think about it, I said, and hung up. Steve poked his head out from the living room. What did that scumbag say? He's trying to blackmail me with bad press. Threatening to spread rumors online that I'm a high-end sugar baby. Steve's face instantly froze. His jaw muscles twitched. Let him try. I'll break his legs. Steve, don't touch him. I stopped my brother with a firm gesture. Let him play his last cards. Needs the illusion that he can still bite me. Otherwise, he won't show up to court voluntarily. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows. I didn't want a quiet divorce in a mediator's office. I wanted an open trial and a public verdict in the name of the state of New York. Only a judge's decree would give me the bulletproof legal grounds to void the deed transfer of my father's apartment. He used a forged power of attorney filed with the county clerk. That wasn't just splitting up spoons and forks. That was grand larceny. Steve stood quietly, crossing his arms. Do you want to put him in a penitentiary? I don't have to. He's digging his own grave. I turned around. You promised to back me up. If he leaks this to the press or the internet, can the Sterling PR team kill it? Easily. Within 24 hours, not a single lie will be left online. We'll put the best crisis management agency in Manhattan on it. Perfect. Then let him post. Let him pour all his dirt on me. And when he runs out of ammo, we strike back. At 4:00 p.m., Dave made his move. A long anonymous post appeared on Reddit and a popular NYC gossip blog. The true face of a prominent Manhattan attorney's wife. How to leech off a billionaire by faking DNA and stealing millions. The text was written in professional legalese, using phrases like, according to reliable sources and evidence in our possession. Within an hour, the post racked up 1,000 comments. The internet mob doesn't care about the truth. They just want a scandal. I read the comments. Gold digger and sugar baby, classic internet tropes. She's average looking at best. What did the old guy even see in her? Mike called. See it, yeah. Our PR department is ready to nuke these posts. But I suggest we leave them up. Why? Let this swamp stew for a bit. Then we drop the official rebuttal. The notarized DNA test. The FBI and NYPD archives from your kidnapping case 26 years ago. The whole chain of authentic documents. Then we sue him for libel and defamation. That's just one more criminal charge to add to his pile. Give him 48 hours, I decided. Let him live with the delusion that he's a master strategist, and he actually won. For those days, I stayed in the Westchester estate playing chess with John by the fireplace. He played a solid old-school defensive game, but twice he deliberately left pieces vulnerable for me to take. When I noticed it the second time, I gave him a reproachful look. John smiled guiltily, like a boy caught with his hand in the cookie jar. Stop letting me win, Dad, I said. All right, sweetheart, he nodded, and on his next move, he casually sacrificed his rook to me anyway. On the second evening, Steve walked into my room without knocking. His face was dead serious. Hey Kate, we got a situation. Nikki filed a police report at the precinct. I sat up on the bed. For what? Domestic violence and assault. Steve showed me his phone screen. It was a photo of Nikki's face sporting a massive black eye and a busted bloody lip. Dave went to their apartment tonight. They got into it again. Guess the stress from the internet scandal broke his nerves. Nikki figured out he was crossing a line and would sink them both if he picked a fight with the Sterlings. One thing led to another and he beat the hell out of her. She ran out to the hallway and called 911. Dave is in a holding cell right now. The ADA is setting his bail. I stared at the horrific photo for a long time. The man I had slept next to, the man I never felt afraid of, was actually harboring a monster inside. It was just that before, I was too submissive to trigger it. I was a convenient victim. Does this help us in court? I asked. Big time. Steve smiled like a predator. A judge will absolutely factor in his history of unprovoked violence. And here's the cherry on top. Nikki had a breakdown at the precinct and started spilling to the detectives. She mentioned the hit and run. She put it on the record that Dave her to flee the scene and orchestrated the forensic tampering. Don't pin it on you. I closed my eyes. The house of cards was collapsing even faster than I had planned. Increase perimeter security, I told Steve. I'm not leaving the gates alone. A man who can frame his innocent wife and beat up his mistress is capable of anything. On the third day, exactly 48 hours later, Mike's team dropped the Sterling Corporation's official statement across every national news outlet. High-resolution scans of all documents. Official medical forensics. Yellowed police reports from the state archives. Copies of the FBI kidnapping case from the 90s. No emotional language, just dry, irrefutable facts. And one final sentence at the bottom. The truth does not require defense. It speaks for itself. Social media across the country exploded in the opposite direction within hours. Holy crap, it's actually the kidnapped baby from the 90s. Where are the keyboard warriors calling her an escort now? Apologize right now. So, her ex-husband is an actual psychopath framing his wife for a felony to save his side. Peace, lock him up and throw away the key. The phrase lawyer frames wife instantly became the top trending topic in the country. These weren't paid bots. It was the pure, unfiltered outrage of normal people hungry for justice. By noon, Dave started blowing up my phone over and over. I ignored him, then he sent a short text. What do you want? Do you want me to die? I stared at the glowing screen. I didn't want him to die. I wanted him to live a very long life with all this disgrace. That was Much more agonizing, at 2:00 p.m., Mike called. The court accepted the docket. Given the compounding criminal evidence and the domestic assault charge, the judge expedited the hearing. First session is next Wednesday. What about Nikki? I asked. Nikki is currently under tight DA supervision. Her messy statement to the cops wasn't enough. They ran a secondary crash reconstruction on the driver's seat angle and mirrors. It is 100% scientifically proven that a woman of her height and build was driving. She won't escape a real prison sentence. That is exclusively her problem, I answered coldly. Kate, SHH, Mike said with brotherly warmth. Exali, rest. We're taking over the rest. We're taking over the rest. For 3 long years, I carried all the household chores and problems on my shoulders. And now, finally, someone had spoken those magic words. I buried my face in the down pillow and let myself sob uncontrollably for exactly 30 seconds. Then I washed my face with ice-cold water and sat down at my laptop to review the legal briefings Mike had sent for the trial. 5 days left. During those 5 days, the coroner Dave did 3 things. First, he hired a wildly expensive Manhattan defense attorney, which forced him to fire sale his investment studio apartment. Second, he tearfully tried to beg his elderly mother to commit perjury on the stand. Brenda flat out refused. Her voice memo had already turned her into a local laughingstock, and she was genuinely terrified to even walk to the corner bodega. Third, he sent me an email that was 3,000 words long, a pathetic, sappy recollection of our bright love, reminiscing about how, in our first year of marriage, I burned a steak in the pan and he choked it down with a smile. I forwarded the essay to Mike with a single question. Are there any legal traps in here for the trial? Mike replied a minute later. No. Typical cheap psychological manipulation. He wants to throw you off balance and play on your pity before the hearing. Delete it. I deleted it without the slightest shred of regret. The night before court, Steve walked onto the veranda without a word and pressed a heavy, antique silver locket into my palm. Moms, he said gruffly, she died 5 years after you were taken. She made us promise to give it to you if we ever found you. I squeezed the cold metal in my hand until my knuckles turned white. Morning. The monumental facade of the New York State Supreme Court building, 17 wide granite steps. 8:45 a.m. I wore a strict black wool coat. My fingers warmed the silver locket in my pocket. On my left was Mike, carrying a heavy leather briefcase bursting with irrefutable evidence. On my right strode Steve, dialed in and mean as a junkyard dog. I had insisted that my father stay home so the press and the judge wouldn't view his presence as a billionaire trying to strong-arm the justice system. In the echoing corridor outside the courtroom stood Dave. He had withered even more. His eyes were sunken deep into his skull. Beside him fidgeted his expensive defense attorney, seeing our entourage. Dave instinctively stood up straight, trying to slap on a mask of his former confidence. I walked right past him, not even dignifying him with a glance. The trial began. The judge announced in a stern voice. Case of Catherine Sterling versus David Davis. Petition for dissolution of marriage and equitable distribution of marital assets. My lawyer, one of the top family law litigators in New York, personally retained by Mike, laid out the demands crisply and dryly. An immediate at-fault divorce, award of all marital assets to the plaintiff, $5 million in compensatory damages for emotional distress, and the annulment of the fraudulent real estate deed transfer based on the forgery of government documents. Dave's lawyer timidly tried to build a defense on fraudulent inducement to marry, arguing that I intentionally hid my true origins and my family's wealth. My attorney blew the argument to pieces instantly. Your Honor, New York domestic relations law provides specific grounds for annulment based on fraud. Concealing one's financial status or family background does not meet the legal threshold for material fraud that goes to the essence of the marriage. Opposing counsel's argument is legally moot. Then came the heavy artillery, the notarized text logs with his mistress, the audio recording from the county detention center, the bank records of wire transfers to corrupt corrections officers, the official handwriting analysis of the forged signatures on the county clerk's deed transfer. A ringing silence hung in the spacious courtroom. Dave's face turned the color of wet ash. His defense attorney was frantically whispering something in his ear, but Dave suddenly jumped up from his seat. Your Honor, his voice cracked. I want to make a statement. I admit it, Jace, I did all of that, but I acted under extreme duress. I was terrified of losing Nikki, but my feelings for Catherine, my lawful wife, were always real. The judge coldly cut off his hysterics with a crack of the wooden gavel. Mr. Dave, this court is not a church, and I am not a priest here to take your confession. Your emotional outbursts have been entered into the record. Take your seat. Dave slumped back onto the hard wooden bench like a puppet with its strings cut. Beside him, his lawyer closed his legal pad with a loud, defeated snap. The case was a clean sweep. After 40 minutes in chambers, the judge delivered the ruling. The plaintiff's petitions are granted in full. The marriage is dissolved. All disputed marital assets are awarded entirely to the plaintiff. The respondent is ordered to pay $5 million in compensatory damages. The real estate transfer is declared fraudulent and legally void. The sharp crack of the gavel put a period on the end of this story. It was over. I didn't feel the euphoria of a victor. It felt more like an experienced surgeon pulling out a rotting tooth that hurts in the moment, but the dull, toxic pain poisoning your body is gone forever. I walked toward the heavy oak double doors. Dave sat frozen, staring blankly at the floor. As I passed him, he suddenly reached out and desperately grabbed the hem of my black coat. His fingers were trembling violently. Kate, it was the same hand that, 3 years ago, slid a gold wedding band onto my finger at City Hall. Absolutely calmly, without a shadow of anger or pity, I peeled his shaking fingers off my coat, one by one. Goodbye, Mr. Dave. I walked out into the corridor and never looked back. On the snow-covered courthouse steps, Steve was waiting with the Escalade running. Judging by his face, they scraped him off the floor. Perfect. Andy already filed the injunctions to freeze his bank accounts. Let this legal genius figure out how he's going to pay that fancy lawyer of his. We walked down the 17 granite steps. A text came through on my phone from John. Waiting at home, sweetheart. The chef made a classic New England clam chowder and warm sourdough. I smiled warmly. Inside the SUV, Steve silently handed me a paper napkin. Go ahead, cry a little for appearance's sake. Otherwise, Dad is going to call a 3-hour emergency family meeting on how to cheer up our Katie. I laughed through the tears welling in my eyes, feeling the final heavy stone fall from my soul. At home, a massive table was set. John sat at the head like a patriarch. The chowder was perfect, hot and thick. Andy carefully peeled some shrimp for me. Mike poured fresh squeezed juice into my glass. David Davis was officially disbarred and disgraced. This morning, Andy reported casually adjusting his glasses. The district attorney has indicted him on multiple felony counts. He's looking at a solid 3 to 7 years in the state penitentiary. Nikki is looking at 5 minimum for the vehicular manslaughter. None of this is your problem anymore, sis. I nodded silently, putting a spoonful of hot soup in my mouth. Later, when it got dark, I sat on the heated veranda, wrapped in a blanket. My phone screen lit up, a text from an unknown number. Katie, my sweet girl, it's Brenda. I'm begging you by all that is holy, for the sake of the 3 years of your marriage, save my Davy. He's my only son, my flesh and blood. I am on my knees before you. I will pray to God for you forever. I stared at this pathetic text for exactly 1 second before using a practiced motion to send the number to my block list. This woman didn't remember God or mercy when she was hitting me across the face as hard as she could in a jail cell. I walked up the wide staircase to my bedroom and gently placed the antique silver locket on my nightstand. Mom, I whispered to the woman whose face I never knew, it's over, your daughter is going to be all right now. I opened my laptop and went to LinkedIn. I clicked on my profile settings, scrolled down, and changed my status from married to single. I clicked update resume. From the first floor, my father's booming voice echoed up, Katie, come downstairs. Andy just brought some fresh cherries, sweet as honey. Coming, Dad, I yelled back brightly, snapping the laptop shut and running barefoot down the oak stairs. In the massive living room, by the roaring fireplace, 3 grown, serious men in expensive shirts were laughing and fighting over a crystal bowl of cherries. I expertly snatched the biggest, ripest cherry right out from under a highly offended Steve's nose. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to sit huddled on the edge of a kitchen stool, obediently waiting until everyone else had eaten. Now, I was loved. Loved unconditionally, simply for existing, and I was going to live this new life with an open heart and joy. Tomorrow, I knew they would begin, a day without iron bars, without humiliating slaps from a greedy mother-in-law, without the betrayal of a man I trusted. just me and my real family. The family I lost in childhood and finally found again, and that was more than enough for absolute happiness.